Good morning and welcome to Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Okay, the date is the 24th of February. We are on 10 a.m. and we will begin the meeting. Can I please ask that phones are muted and laptops are also muted? Thank you. Okay, we'll start with number 1. Apologies, please, Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Heath, Peters, Francis and Cabinet members Councillor Parry and Councillor Tagg.
Thank you. Do we have any further apologies? No? Thank you. Okay. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, we'll move on to number 3. Minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of January 2025. Do we have a proposer? Oh, Mike was... Tina, can I put you down as the seconder? Thank you. Okay, there is a bit of a change on the agenda this morning. So we do, as you know, we have various members missing, Cabinet members missing, and we do unfortunately have Sarah, who was going to do the proposed apprenticeship strategy for us. However, Alan has very kindly stepped in and will do the item 6 for us. However, we are moving it to item number 4. So Alan, sorry, Councillor White, I do apologise.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would ordinarily have Mrs. Getley with me, Head of HR. She has a family bereavement to a funeral to go to at 12 o'clock today, so she's been instructed not to attend. I have with me Mrs. Roberts-Malloy, who is the author of the report that you have in front of you. So in some respects, you have a better chance of getting to the detail with Mrs. Roberts-Malloy. We intend to, or Mrs. Roberts-Malloy will take you through a brief presentation. It is only 10 slides long and it gives some of the details around the proposed apprenticeship strategy. Unfortunately, the slides it's fairly small print, so you may not be able to make out the detail too much, but we'll skip through the slides fairly quickly and get to questions because you've got a detailed report in front of you. Just in terms of the report itself, you are being asked to do 5 things at this committee meeting this morning. I don't intend to go through those in any detail. We'll come back to those towards the end. I would notice an observation that the LGA describing their work as an MOT is a little unfortunate because that describes the minimum standards a car requires in order to be on the road. And I would hope that we are some way ahead of being at the minimum standards for our apprenticeship strategy. Paragraph 3 of the report sets out the history, and paragraph 4 the Chief Executive's instruction to deliver improvements to the organisational strategy. We will, of course, the objective of that was to ensure that the establishment is fit for purpose and productive, attracts and develops the best talent, and ensures that we have good progression and succession arrangements in place, and the specific objectives being to assess the overall efficiency of the establishment, develop organisational design standards and deploy a dynamic recruitment, development and retention programme with emphasis on apprenticeships and critical pathway. So of the organisational structure improvements that we were looking for, this focuses on one narrow area, which is apprenticeships. And if you've had a chance to read the report, you'll see that there have been successes and challenges with our apprenticeships, and they are set out in many of the appendices that you've got before you. The proposed strategy is set out on, or the format of the proposed strategy is set out on page 81, paragraphs 31A, B, C and D, and the aims are set out in the subsequent paragraph 32. You do have the draft strategy in front of you on page 133, and it is a short, sharp strategy, and that's exactly how I like strategies to be, because that gives them a better chance of getting read. So that's the preamble, Madam Chair, and with that, what I'm going to do is hand over to Mrs. Roberts-Malloy, who will just take you through the presentation. As I say, it's only a few slides, just to give you a sense of how we've come to be where we are today. We're with you.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for taking time to listen to me this morning. So, as Mr. White has said,
You need to point it at the front. Do you want me to do it?
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you. We've spent several months working on a new apprenticeship strategy to allow Staffordshire County Council to be the best it can be when it comes to our apprenticeships and using our levy. This is to support our current colleagues and residents across Staffordshire County Council to be able to be supported in their skills and growth and to be able to support their opportunities. We do understand that at the time that we are issuing and proposing this strategy, there are changes at national government in relation to where the strategy may have to go in relation to the levy. There aren't marked changes in that would impact the apprenticeship strategy that we've put forward, but we would have to be able to review and take a note on the fact that we may have to grow to growth and skills. We currently have a range of disciplines that are working to support our current apprentices. We would look to expand upon those and reduce the offers of level 7s. That's also in line with national expectation. Over the current period of the strategy, we have spent over £4 million and propose that that would be moving forward at a similar rate. We would like to be able to use 90% of the levy, which currently isn't being used, and we are working with partners to be able to support them within the strategy. It states that we would like to be an apprenticeship-first organisation, so that we offer as many apprenticeship opportunities as possible with the levy that we have to give. We were supported by the LGA to create this document. They have vast experience of using apprenticeships, both internal and external, and with fantastic support from colleagues in EINS who have been looking after apprenticeships for over the last few years. Currently, we have 225 apprentices that have undertaken effective and successful apprentices with 45 providers. There is opportunity for us to grow and sharpen our providers with this strategy and support many more apprentices at different levels to be able to support early talent as well as our key functions. Some of the challenges that we've faced over the last 4 to 5 years has been that the service has been positioned in a reactive organisation, not a proactive. The strategy is looking more towards being a proactive organisation with our apprenticeship levy, supporting potentially the most needed. So part of the strategy is looking at our care leavers, armed forces, asylum and refugees, and young people, predominantly under 25, but Staffordshire County Council under 30. We've had the reliance on training providers that we have always used and not had an opportunity to be able to review those to have the best support that we can. And we've had limited resource to actually support the apprentice themselves. And so this proposal is proposing that we have someone to be able to support them and limited capacity to be able to move the strategy forward, hence this proposal to be able to move from EINS. I think I've touched on those points. Thank you. Priority actions is to be able to relocate the leadership and the ownership of the apprenticeship strategy from EINS into people services, to be able to have an oversight of full organisational apprenticeship review, and to be able to look at KPIs and return on investment so we can report this effectively. What we're asking for you to consider and give feedback on today is the proposed structure of increasing the people services FTEs by 3 full-time posts. That will be 1 apprenticeship team leader sitting under the talent and resourcing manager, an apprenticeship support and inclusion officer which supports the well-being, the holistic view and the learning pathway of each apprentice, and apprenticeship administrators to ensure that we meet national and legal obligations of recording and making sure that we use our levy effectively. When we have asked the LGA to review that, the amount of honorariums and increase money that we've had to put into salaries in EINS, it actually equates to an additional 1.4 FTE that we'll be taking over, which is circa 171,000 per annum. We'll be looking at transitioning over the shortest period possible if the proposed strategy is confirmed, to allow us to be able to support those currently in apprenticeship learning journey and to be able to rapidly increase our apprentices moving into the spring and summer period. So our recommendations to you: firstly, to note the success of the current apprenticeship programme over the past 4 to 5 years. The EINS has done an amazing job in supporting the current apprenticeship programme. Note the findings that our external LGA did in relation to their assessment, and 3 points that myself and Councillor White will be responding to today. Comment on feedback of any findings and conclusions from our recommendation, please, on any rationale or background of the objectives, and finally the proposed strategy and implementation plan itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you quite happy to take questions? Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Spencer, please.
Thank you for that, and thank you for taking us through that. And I think you're quite right to recognise the real value that apprenticeships bring. When we were, I think it indicated there that we had an opportunity to use some of that, what was it, the level 7 money, if I read it properly. Have we been able to use that to our advantage? And how can we demonstrate that quite how we've done that? And secondly, I suppose, just looking through some of the challenges there, people dropping out, I suppose that there is an issue around wasting some of that money if people drop out. Have we learned lessons from that in any meaningful way? And also the last question really would be this additional funding. Will that impact on some of that low, what I probably am anticipating is low-level problems, i.e. I think I noticed that some of the employers weren't fully on board or fully committed to providing the necessary feedback. Will this additional money address those particular issues?
Thank you very much for those questions. So firstly, currently we have a large amount of people that have asked for level 7s. There are currently MBAs. During the work that we did with the LGA, we can see a small advantage for certain parts of the organisation for particular technical skill, but not return on investment in relation to that. So we'd be looking at reducing our level 7s unless it's part of strategy, delivery plan or organisation need. The national government is looking at reducing level 7s anyway to be more proportionate to early talent and supporting the under 25s. So we'd be looking much more at early talent, apprenticeship first, and supporting the groups that, as we see, are important to Staffordshire County Council. As I said, things like our care leavers. So those are much more entry-level apprenticeships rather than level 7s. Yes, we learnt huge amounts of our lessons learnt by doing this work. It took us several months to do so. And by doing that, we learnt very quickly that one of the main reasons that people did not finish or dropped out was endpoint assessments. So endpoint assessments with third-party providers, you don't have to do from an employer perspective, but from a training provider, you must do to be able to pull that levy down. And so some of our partnership relationships have been broken because of that. So people weren't asked to complete the endpoint assessments, and there wasn't that holistic support for the early talent potentially new into work coming out of armed forces into Civvy Street. And so there wasn't that support around to be able to enable people. The other key thing that isn't in this report that some of you will have noted nationally is that there is potentially going to be a change to the literacy need and numeracy need for apprentices above the age of 25 to 30. we noted that that has been a problem for dropout as well. So there hasn't been that support of encouraging people to complete their literacy and numeracy to enable them to complete their apprenticeship. That's why that mid-role is required, because that mid-role would be doing what I call a tripad work, working as part of Staffordshire County Council, the partner and the apprentice themselves to make sure that they complete and do the best that they can in their programme. And finally, the role of the additional funding, absolutely. So one, we think that we will get to be able to use all of our levy and all of our providers will be able to pull down. We'll have much better working relationships with our partners, and actually we'll be able to have talent pathways, that we will have early talent coming in and having a trajectory. I also am responsible as Head of People Solutions for the talent and resourcing, and apprenticeship first and looking after our care leavers is primary. The other reason for dropout is because there weren't roles at the end of the apprenticeship. We have changed our talent and resourcing model to now make sure if you do an apprenticeship, there will be an opportunity at Staffordshire County Council to be able to continue your employment journey.
Chair, thank you for that. And hugely encouraging to hear all of that. Could I just clarification around the first bit, which I don't think I heard quite right. When you think of apprenticeships, you do think of, don't you, that leavers, care leavers, you think of people who probably haven't had the best start, maybe giving them that hand up to get going and to address some of the shortfalls maybe in their early education. I was surprised to hear mention of MBAs. Is that the Masters in Business Administration? Is that... that seems quite a senior role and position for me. I wonder if I just have some clarity around that. I do wonder whether that is an appropriate level or appropriate thing for an apprenticeship to be funding.
So part of this proposed strategy is to move away from that when it comes over into people services. Apprenticeships can be level 2 all the way up to level 7. So from SATs year 9 all the way up to a master's level, and our proposal is that this is much more concentrated on 2, 3, 4 and 5, those early entry level, the aspiring managers, the people that we need to go into middle management to support our succession on our workforce planning, but very much so focused on people that were able to or unable to get GCSEs, and really focus on our early talent across Staffordshire.
Like I say, Chair, that's hugely encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Yates.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the colour-coded summary on page 101 from the LGA MOT, is that we obviously have got a ways to go on this journey, and I think the presentation which you give obviously recognised some of the issues with the leadership and the culture, and transferring it over to a people's-led, and identifying the need for people specific, new employees specifically to look after the management of the apprentices, and that will make that improvement, I'm sure. But it is very much a developing picture. It says it's a developing picture at the bottom on where we are, and I think we have come quite a way. It's something which I've championed both at county level and district level, because there is an element of needing to identify and train your own people in their own areas of skills and disciplines. You can't just go into the open market and expect to get skilled people and fit in, so that works. Picking up on a point from Councillor Spencer before I go through the other issues which I want to raise, is that with the cost of university education, I think there is obviously an alternative now route to get a decent level, a degree level qualification. So I actually applaud the fact that you are looking up to grade 5 in the scale, so to speak, and potentially beyond it if that opportunity arises. And obviously there is some slack in the spend on the apprenticeship levy, and what I would implore is that if there is the appropriate person who is developing, then that is looked to actually push those on to 6 and 7 and produce the next management team coming. I think it is an opportunity to work closely with the colleges and the universities to develop specific courses which suit local government. I don't know how closely you do that. I imagine you do have good contacts with the colleges and universities, a lot of which are absolutely on his doorstep, and broadening the range to some of the new skills which are required, you know, like development with aspects to do with adaptation and climate change, and the engineering which is associated into that. So, you know, I understand the concentrating on the education, the social services side and those skills, but there is a broader range, and you know, society is changing, and the needs and ways our employees will work will change. So we need to adapt to that. I am interested in the age profile of the apprentices which we do and get. I understand that's quite a number of apprentices now are mature apprentices already within the organisation who are being retrained or trained on to enhance the skills or additional skills. And I'm wondering how many of your apprentices do you actually, as a percentage, recruit from existing employees, as opposed to go out into the marketplace and actively seek unemployed people to actually develop and give them the skills and get them on the opportunity to work. And I am interested in the completion, not just the completion rate for getting an apprenticeship qualification, but the retention rate, say after a couple of years, that they are still actually in the system, so we're getting the benefit of their new skills, their training, and the monies which we've paid out.
I'll just start with a few of the points you've raised, Councillor Yates, before I hand over to Mrs Roberts-Malloy. We're always seeking to improve ourselves, and I think honest appraisals of our current performance, like as set out in the LGA MOT, is an acknowledgement that we've got to be better at some of the things that we do. And I think the transparency that we present to you today, the honesty that's contained within the report, allows us to be clear about what needs to be improved and the work that needs to be done. Myself and the Chief Executive are determined that things get better, and that we're honest about the amount of work that's required to do that. You're right about the cost of university education, of course. None of my older children have been to university. My first son is in the army. Second son did an apprenticeship in Fradley Park in an engineering company, 3-year apprenticeship, qualified, has moved on to other jobs. And to that point about the retention thing, he did his apprenticeship with one engineering company and has got a job with another engineering company, because once you're a qualified engineer, you are a valuable asset to any company, and so it gives young people the choices to go and do different things. And I wouldn't necessarily want to be holding them back from that. I think that the fact that there is a different education system based on practical skills, and that's an education system that existed when I was young, and I think it had a lot of benefits. We would like to see, I would like to see, changes in the way that FE funding is structured. At the moment, I went to see the new principal of Stoke College about 3 weeks ago, and he is quite constrained in the way that his funding can be allocated. And so if somebody has done an apprenticeship and then wants to go to university, there's a preparing for university course that you can do, but it's narrowly defined, and we will get some freedoms if there is some devolution from government to local areas and strategic authorities in particular, which would enable that to happen. Just turning to the mature apprentices point, in the news this morning, the news that I listen to anyway, there's a point about the falling birth rates, and we currently have a birth rate in the United Kingdom, as reported, of 1.44. That isn't enough to keep our population even static. It means the population is in decline. So the need for apprenticeships to be created, which allow people to change careers, maybe halfway through, maybe twice, maybe 3 times during their working lives, which will extend out in any event because of the increasing average age of the population and the reduction in the birth rate. I think that presents an opportunity as well, and I think governments may well switch on to that in due course. Just turning to the other 2 questions that you asked, I'll just defer to Mrs Roberts-Malloy for those 2, which is the percentage from existing employees and the completion and retention rates. Over to you.
So completion of existing, we currently are waiting on data in relation to that, because the last data cut that we did was September 24. So I'll get those figures for you after this meeting. But what we found was a majority of people were using the apprenticeship levy to upskill current employees. And that's what's happened over the last 5 years. What this strategy is proposing is there's a marked change in that. That isn't that we will not invest in our own upskill, have succession workforce planning, have leadership ready for the next generation. This is very much supporting the under 25s, under 30s to be able to take opportunities in employment where they might not be able to elsewhere, with a supported hand, with the guidance of a learning pathway, and definitely in partnerships with organisations and education establishments that are on our doorstep. It seems remiss that we are not using and supporting education and training providers within Staffordshire County Council. So this is also to review those partnerships and make sure that we're getting the best quality training providers that we can to support our apprentices. What we believe is that by supporting early talent and those at 2, 3, 4 and 5 predominantly, is that we will have reduced withdrawal rates of around 20 to 30% because of creating a bespoke, very specific team to support that in relation to all of our contracts from our training providers, the learning pathways that our apprentices need to be on, and that holistic support for someone to start their career or to leave a career in the armed forces and come into another one. There is often a lot of wraparound support that is required. There is often other responsibilities, for example, caring or childcare, and have that flexible approach. And so we are proposing that that will support not only reduce turnover because they will want to stay with us at Staffordshire County Council, but also reduce recruitment costs. So rather than having to go out to recruit, we should have a clear pathway of we have someone on a learning pathway, and so the vacancies that then come up are ring-fenced for apprentices to be able to take. So all of that will support, and then we will have a clear reporting mechanism to be able to understand why we might go above a level 5 to 6 and 7, which is purposeful and engaging for the individual, but also is purposeful and proportionate to what we need as an organisation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
I'd just like to say, excellent answer. Ticked an awful lot of boxes. Very good to hear. Thank you.
Praise indeed. Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No. Can I just ask a question? I know you've just touched on employers. Are you looking to reach out for other employers to work with Staffordshire County Council? I've seen the list that you've got on page, I've just lost it on my phone, sorry. One moment. Is it page 33? 133? And you've got Staffordshire Police, Beeches Park Children's Day Nursery. Are they the ones you work with?
So those are absolutely the current providers that we work with because we're not using all of our levy. So if you don't use all of your levy, it's on an annual 12-month rotation. So rather than lose that levy, we then offer it to other employees. What we're suggesting is that we continue to support employers that need that additional levy, of course we do, but we'd like to use as much as the levy as we can ourselves, and this strategy is proposing that we can increase our apprentices, increase that early talent and is use as much as possible while still being an organisation that supports others that may be in need.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I think you've been very thorough in what you've said. I did read through the report as best as I could, and I do feel that you do have a lot of hard work there. You have got a lot, and you do need the support. And would everybody be happy with the recommendations that Mrs. Lloyd-Robinson has given to us today? Yes? Okay. I think we're quite happy to accept your report then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I just ask the committee to note that Mrs. Robertson-Lloyd was told that she was attending this committee at about 9:25. So I think that's an absolutely outstanding presentation. Well done. Really well done.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor White, I believe it's you again on item 4.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As I said to you a moment ago, or earlier before the committee started, Councillor Parry's unavailable this morning and Councillor Tagg's unavailable this morning. So we are going to test to destruction the theory that you cannot have too much of a good thing, because you're stuck with me. But as an interesting adjunct to this report, I've got Mrs. Bissell, who's going to be supporting me in the same way that Mrs. Roberts-Malloy was supporting me on the last point. So this is the Q3 report in the new format, which I think is much more readable than the old formats. Allows you to interrogate the data in more detail. The requirement or the request of you is to note and challenge the Q3 report. And I know that members of this committee do go into great detail on areas of interest to them, and it gives you the opportunity to air any concerns you have and highlight any strong places of performance that we have. The summary is set out on page 14 of your pack, and it highlights, there are some highlights there and there are some challenges, and probably we'll be going through the report in some detail, just focusing on some of both. It is tempting to draw yourself to the red, but don't forget that the council is composed of many parts, and there are some parts where we do have challenges, but other parts where we're doing extremely well. I'd also ask you to bear in mind some of the uncertainty that's been created by the government's determination to go through local government reorganisation. That presents some opportunities, but it also presents some uncertainty for members of staff who don't perhaps know what the future looks like, and I think that is something we need to treat with some sensitivity, and I would ask committee members to do that, because districts and boroughs don't know where they stand at the moment, and indeed our teams across the county of Staffordshire and those working for Stoke-on-Trent will find themselves in a similar sort of position as well. So I would ask for a degree of sensitivity if that subject comes up. We deal in the report with adults on page 16, and you'll note there the challenge of getting supported living through. That is close to completion now, and that has been due to a bit of additional advice that we've been seeking about that report, but that will be sorted out by next month. The children's services at page 18 remains a challenge. There's been a lot of work done looking at the structure of the organisation and making sure that we've got sufficient capacity within it in order to attend to the challenges that we face. You'll recall that we've had a fairly narrow senior team at the top, some of whom have got huge spans of command, and what we're doing is we're trying to distribute that a bit more evenly and increase the size of the assistant director portfolio to enable more efficient and indeed more diligent work with children. The economy is set out on page 21, climate change page 23, highways, some good performance in highways, but you'll know as you've travelled here today that the rain and the wet causes problems for roads. So we get ahead of the curve on the run up to the winter rains, and then the winter rains take us back a step in preparation for the spring pothole filling season. So it's a constant cycle of attacking the issues and then dealing with the challenges that winter leaves us. Communities set out on page 26, and then in corporate, the main area in corporate where we have a concern is social services case management systems, but that is about to be resolved. We will be taking to Cabinet very shortly the decision about which system that we will contract with, if I can get all my words out. So, Madam Chairman, that's the sort of breadth of the report. I've got Mrs. Bissell with me to answer any questions in detail. I'm conscious of the fact we've got the chairs of the committees sitting in the room, so I'm always vulnerable to detailed questions. That's the reason why Mrs. Bissell's here, to pick up those detailed questions that I can't answer. Back to you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Councillor White, Mrs. Bissell? Thomas Loughborough. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask a few questions if you don't mind, Councillor White. Firstly, how close are we to getting the SEND provision in place for Lichfield District? Because in here it notes that by the end of January, we're now on the 24th of February. Have we got any progress on that yet?
Councillor.
The special educational needs, educational, there's a name for it here, the Lichfield District in particular, here we go, 1 second. Yeah. We're looking at it's SEND improvements, staff to enhance district inclusion support was highlighted on page 14, and it's highlighted later that this is one of the areas that we're, obviously not got a provider for. And secondly, I'm bearing in mind that obviously local government, reformed. How is that going to affect what's going on with Chasewater, considering its timetable is 2026, funding concerning that? And thirdly, I'd like to praise the council's work on addiction services. I think that locally, obviously in Lichfield District, we've opened better way, and I think that progress in Tamworth in particular has been, I'd like to note that that's been quite improved.
Thank you, Councillor Loughborough. As to the point about the timescales for the Lichfield District getting the SEND improvements, I don't have that to hand, I'm afraid, but Mrs Bissell's just noted that down and we'll get back to you with an answer to that. Local government reorganisation should not have an impact on the timetables for capital programmes and the delivery of schemes that are already in the pipeline. So your comments about Chasewater, we would anticipate the delivery of these things on time. Obviously, there's elections in May, and a new administration might have different priorities, but they are commitments that certainly at this point we would adhere to. So the uncertainty created with our district and borough colleagues is what's that political word you use, the jargon? Unhelpful, to say the least. Because if you're in a district, as I was a district councillor for 20 years, you've got plans in place. The uncertainty that this creates is something that will make you think twice about your plans and what your priorities are. So, but as it stands at the moment, the commitment to Chasewater will remain. You talk about addiction services. That's something that is led by a gentleman called Tony Bullock in the County Council. He's an extremely committed and diligent officer on that subject, and when I was doing the portfolio which included addiction services, he made sure that I became very familiar with the services available to people struggling with addiction across the county. There are some great services out there, that's undoubtedly the case, but there's always room for improvement on those addiction services. So we have transitioned from some of our previous providers we've stopped working with, and new providers have come onto the scene. I think that's right and proper because times move on, and the ability of some of our old providers to deliver in the way that we hope they would changes. So I'm glad your observation about addiction services in Lichfield and Tamworth is what it is. I'd be very grateful if you continue to monitor that and report back if you see any changes to that, because it's information like that on the ground which helps us deliver great services.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on your comment with regards to the social services case management system, and you're getting close to making a decision on that. Just aware that IT systems are a constant evolving thing, and with reference to local government reorganisation, obviously we've got an island in the middle at the moment which is involved in that, which is Stoke-on-Trent, and they may be operating an alternative system. I'm just wondering whether the approach from now onwards, while we've got this period of uncertainty and unknownness, is to try and get a degree of commonality in at least systems which speak to one another, if it ends up having a bigger, being involved in a bigger council or the strategic authority, and that we've actually got everybody can operate and interchange with that one system, because residents in some respects don't always recognise a line on the ground, and when you're providing services, especially if those services are going to be in a more combined approach, whether physical or actual local government or strategic, I think that is an important consideration from now on. And I think that consideration, I'm sure you were aware, and you're probably ahead of me on this, has got to be taken case in anything to do with, I think, IT, to make sure that systems are sort of to speak to each other and integrated. The other thing is that the reference to supported living, which is a problem area, is we see an awful lot of small relatively small properties being converted for supported living, which always causes angst in local communities at the planning stage. But when they're actually delivered, generally speaking, there's no noise or complaint about them. But it's pretty obvious that these are, in some respects, opportunistic based on available properties, and they all seem to be national private companies who are doing them, and obviously there's a premium in the cost of that. I'm just wondering if there's a forward strategy for Staffordshire County Council to develop their own or enhance their own supported living a little, and to me I see it a little bit like sending the academisation and the private school issue, is that we're obviously paying a high premium to the private sector to supply these buildings. They do an awful lot of good for the people who are go into there. It's certainly a very progressive way of dealing with things. I've visited quite a number, and every time I come out with a smile on my face and my eyes absolutely wide open. I just wonder if the council's got plans for a more direct role, like we've had plans for a more direct role in providing places for social care. And finally, with regards to environment and countryside, there's reference in there to the audit which has been done with regard to restoring the Staffordshire Way. I'd just like to make a shout out that this is an absolute ideal opportunity, certainly within sections of the Staffordshire Way, which is not a new footpath. It's effectively a collection of existing footpaths which have been brought together to produce a link, which is very similar to what happened in 1929 with the Grand Union Canal. It was a collection of existing canals which are actually remapped and brought together to create the Grand Union Canal. Originally it was parts of a Birmingham Canal, parts of the Oxford Canal and whatever, to bring it together. And I'm wondering whether it is an opportunity, in part where it's practicable, to connect the Staffordshire Way to the cycling network. And certainly in the Staffordshire Moorlands and East Staffordshire, the Staffordshire Way could actually augment existing cycle routes, which actually would produce a nice national cycle route. And I think there is scope to actually dual the purpose of that where it's actually appropriate, and actually contribute to the climate change agenda and the sustainable transport agenda, and enhance tourism.
So the social services case management thing and local government reorganisation. Stoke-on-Trent City Council uses Liquid Logic, and there are two. The reason why we're having to do this anyway is because Care Director is leaving the market. We are currently in contract with an organisation called Care Director. They are moving away from that, so we need to procure a new case management system. There are two providers in the market that we're looking at. One is Mosaic and the other is Liquid Logic. And as I say, Liquid Logic is the one that Stoke-on-Trent City Council use. A decision will be made, I think, on the 3rd of March. It's going to Cabinet, I think. The final decision will be made on the 3rd of March as to which system that this authority is going to use for the future. Whatever the vagaries of local government reorganisation, at our feet is the requirement to do the best by Staffordshire residents. It's not to do the best by Stoke-on-Trent City Council residents. So the decision that will be made around the case management system will be one that's based on in the best interests of Staffordshire residents. These are what's known as commercial off-the-shelf systems, so there is no requirement for a design implementation, but there will be a requirement. The same, I've been around now long enough to remember when Care Director was implemented, and now it's retiring. Makes me feel old. There will be a requirement to make sure that the super users and the implementation goes smoothly. Having had experience of that previously, I think we know where the pitfalls are. So we will keep you posted, and if you watch out, we'll be announcing that next week. Supported living, the angst that you referred to at the planning stage made me think, I wonder if he's talking about children's services or adult services. Adult services, okay. Because I'm aware that every time a a proposed private development is transferred to the county council or purchased by the county council for children's services purposes, that certainly creates angst in the planning system. Less so with adults, I think. But we have, with children's, had a plan of acquiring properties for children's homes because we are concerned that the way the market operates does exhibit, I have to be careful with the language I use, but there is a sort of, it does look and feel like cartel behaviour because the prices are all pretty fixed around a certain amount, and you end up scratching your head thinking to yourself, how can it be that much? But it is. So the best way to test that is to find out for ourselves how much it costs to run these things. I'm more than willing on the adult side to do a similar sort of thing over the next few years if we get that chance to do so, because it's important that we understand whether or not we are getting best value, because ultimately that's what we're here to do, isn't it? Secure best value for our council taxpayers. On the environment and the countryside, your reference to Staffordshire Way, I know the portfolio holder, if she was here now, would tell you that she's actually walked to the whole thing. So she took on the portfolio and said, you know what, I better walk it just to find out what it's all about. Your idea of integrating it with the cycling network would probably come up against quite a few stiles and locked gates that you have to go around, and farmers' fields that they would object to you cycling through. So whilst I wouldn't dismiss the idea, and parts of it, because that's what you were asking for, you weren't asking for the whole thing, parts of it might be possible to do. The whole thing certainly isn't at this stage, and it will be a while before I could imagine having meaningful conversations with landowners about having bicycles going over their land. But you didn't say the whole thing, you said parts, so maybe.
Thank you, Councillor White. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Spencer.
Thank you for that. I think it is important when you read this report, as we've already said, to recognise the outstanding work that has been done. And I'm sure you'd expect me, as the Chair of Safeguarding, to comment on issues around children and adult safeguarding, because I think it would be wrong of us to join both of those things together. And we had an update from both Children's Services and Adult Safeguarding only last week. And if I set aside the issues around the case management system, which have already been discussed, I'm always impressed with the way that this council deals with vulnerable adults. And when we talked earlier about how the boundary changes are likely to change and influence that, and none of us know, of course. But at the moment, the direction of travel is that this council will join with Stoke-on-Trent around the way that it deals with some adult social care issues. And the question naturally arose about the impact on both of these services of the boundary changes. I was particularly impressed by the message that came back was that we are here to safeguard and protect those vulnerable people. And whatever happens in the future, we will deal with that and make the most of it. But there was a very clear commitment to the continued good support around, in particular, adult social care. Other questions, just by way of an example, around losing some of what I describe as the granularity of the data in the report. If we were to join with Stoke-on-Trent, they are very different. We are very different places. Some of the places and focus of where adults might be abused is very different here in Staffordshire to what it is in Stoke-on-Trent. The fear about losing that granularity of data and therefore losing the opportunity to intervene was addressed very clearly by the head of the service. And we were all left in no doubt that that granularity won't be lost. And the cross-working, the improved working around agencies means that we will be even better at dealing with vulnerable adults than we currently are. Having said all of that, it would be amiss to suggest that Children's Services is the same and you only have to read the report here around some of that. But again, by way of reassurance, we had the ILACS inspection and the first report well, the second report, the first one was in July last year, but we had an update around it this just last week. And again, a very impressive set out schedule of how we intend to address these not small issues, of course, and some of them very significant indeed. But we were left again with that reassurance around how we move forward with some of that, which I do think is a real positive. Issues around send and transport EHCPs will always remain. And part of that, I do think, is perhaps out of the control of local authorities. However, I did want to just finish on one particular point, certainly around the number of young people who are in care, something that certainly in my years of being a councillor here has been the issue that we have made a point that we need to get down, as we've seen in this report about the additional costs that brings. And on page 46, I think it is, of the report, I was particularly pleased to see that one of the first issues that we are now going to address is the thorny issue of thresholds around people, young people coming into care. There has been some peer-reviewed evidence from other local authorities around us that Staffordshire does have a different level of thresholds. And you might just think that's not about saving money. If we have too many young, vulnerable people in the system, you increase the opportunity then for missing those that really do need that care. So it is important that those numbers are kept to a minimum. That comes with risk. And of course, sometimes that risk is abated, if you like, by lowering or raising those particular thresholds. So I do particularly welcome, page 46, the review of thresholds. I do think that's important in the way that we continue to provide good safeguarding for young people. And certainly, if I were here in the forthcoming year, it would be top of my agenda around the safeguarding committees, just to make sure that we get that right. I do think that's really important. I've probably overdone the message, but there you go. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer, as always, you raise a critically important point about thresholds. And as you made that point, my brain started whirring to think of the actual theory that you put before us this morning, which is low threshold, more children in care, actually a greater propensity to miss those ones who could actually be genuinely in trouble because you have a flabby system full to the gunnels, unable to actually do the work that it needs to do out in the field. That's a huge challenge you've just put before us, and it's something that needs to be contemplated in depth, because there's real meaning to that, and there's also an understanding of how we manage risk and what attitude we have to risk in order to actually reduce the risk to those that are most vulnerable. It's sounding like a circular argument I'm putting back to you, but it's not. It's something that's you can actually hear the cogs whirring in my brain, I think, trying to get to the bottom of the challenge that you put before us. Can I take that away and replay this section of the committee meeting to colleagues in children's services to try and get an answer to that? The local government's reorganisation piece, it is the 11 questions that the Secretary of State requires the authorities who are in scope for this to actually answer in their initial responses is, when you read through them, you'll see that whoever drafted the questions doesn't really understand the full scope of the work that is done by districts and upper tier local authorities. And you raised the point about the challenge of safeguarding. If there was a reorganisation in Stafford and Stoke-on-Trent, the safeguarding challenge changes. And has that been formally appraised? Will it get formally appraised, or is it just one of those things which all too often we have in this country, where things are slid under the carpet because it's too difficult to do and it's over there. And then the first you know that it has actually slid under the carpet or been missed is when there is a tragic case that occurs. And people are then scratching their heads asking, how did we miss that? Why didn't we actually anticipate that that could happen? We will have to, after the draft proposals go in on the 21st of March, do a full evaluation of any proposals for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent and the 8 constituent districts and boroughs across the county for submission by the 28th of November. That is a short period of time to look at a very large range of variables, some of which are unknown to us. So, again, the point you make about that is really, really vitally important, and it's something that I know colleagues will be looking at in some detail. I think they were the 2 key points I took away from it. That children in care threshold thing's vitally important. I'll feed that back.
Just on that issue, I think what has happened over many, many years, and I had some experience in a previous role, of course, dealing with mainly the Black Country authorities in Birmingham. And what was very clear was having to move children in particular, vulnerable children at short notice, usually from Staffordshire into one of the Black Country authorities. There was a willingness to do that, but when the child arrived, unfortunately the child didn't meet the threshold of that receiving authority. And it was a generally well-known fact that Staffordshire's was certainly much lower. There was a view, and I wouldn't like to make a judgment on it, that if you lower the threshold, then the responsibility of senior leadership becomes easier because there's less risk to be managed around that. So, but we've been told for many, many years that thresholds have been looked at and there's no difference between any of them. I do think this is an absolute opportunity to iron that out and make sure that the threshold.
Councillor White.
Could I just respond to that? I'm just being shown an email for our daily our weekly in-outs, and everyone has gone through every individual child has gone through in detail. But the point about thresholds, I will still take away.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a comment, really, regarding the, let me just get the in front of me, in terms of our additional nursing home capacity. We see on page 17, I'm pleased, and I think this is an expression of gratitude, in a sense, of the hard-working members of staff that we have that are being able to get us into that position. And equally, you'll see at paragraph 15, the CQC, a lot of preparation has gone into that. And I think unless you've actually been involved in the process, which I was involved as well, was how much work was involved, and that has to be recognised. Obviously, we have to wait for the outcome of the report in May, but leading up to it, honestly, the amount of time and effort those involved need to be, you know, pat on the back. I'm not saying we should always be, you know, preempting a report decision, but it wouldn't be for the lack of effort from our members of staff. And something that my committee would obviously always want to be working with is ensuring that assurance is there, and making sure that our adult social care is as much as possible and the best that we can possibly have. In terms of supported living, that is something that obviously needs work in progress, but I feel that with the people that we have within our organisation, I'm sure that is going to go upwards, and I look forward to to that. And the drug and alcohol treatment services, I also acknowledge exactly where we're with that, with our partners. And in fact, a conversation I've had with the ICB is that it is an issue right through the situation with hospitals and so on, in terms of patients coming in that are drug and alcohol related. And of course, the capacity doesn't always necessarily meet the needs that they've got. So it's a challenge, and I think the word challenge has been used on more than one occasion today. But life wouldn't be easy without challenges, so we have to accept them front on. So really, it's just a comment, Chair. I just think that those that are involved need a big thank you, certainly from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White, did you want to come back?
Duly noted, and I'll pass on your thanks to the team at Adult Social Services. There was a phenomenal amount of preparation. Just in case the leader gets called for interview, preparation took 4 hours of one-to-one intense one-to-one briefings. It was like having, you see the boxes in the corner being with their seconds. Right, you'll say this. There was 4 hours of that, just to make sure that I was thoroughly reminded of all the responsibilities that we have, and that I was able to answer questions coherently in case the CQC came to ask me any questions. They didn't, but had they done, they'd have been assured by the fact that the leader had been well briefed by the team, which was good.
Thank you. Councillor Clements, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. A question and an acknowledgement, if I may. Just something that Councillor Spencer's just said. Do different authorities have different thresholds when we're looking at moving children from one borough to another? Is there not a national threshold?
There's not a national threshold. There are upper-tier local authority thresholds. So you'll find there's a different threshold for Stoke as there is for Staffordshire, as there is for Walsall, as there is for Sandwell, as there is for Birmingham. All the upper tiers have slightly different thresholds.
Okay, thanks for that. That's a bit of a worry. I just wanted to draw members' attention to the highways operational delivery and transformation, and to just take those figures in that with the work that's been done over the last quarter, with 28,000 potholes, 53,000 gullies emptied, and as Councillor White said right at the start, the weather has been against us at all times, with 2 named storms right at the beginning of the year. So credit where it's due. And then the other thing I wanted to say was about the successful delivery of the new CRM system, the customer relationship system. I went with with Tim Hemmingsley to do that live. And for members, when you create your account, there's a feedback button where you can leave your feedback, because it's still in beta stage, so we can still beta, however, and we can still make changes to the system before it goes completely live. So I'd urge members to do that. And then the last thing from me was the library's volunteer hours. On Friday, we visited Tamworth Library and managed to speak to some of the volunteers that actually do carry out the operational works there, and it's amazing what they do. There are so many things that they take on responsibility for, and again, that's credit to the volunteers that save us some money.
I'm really pleased to see the amount of work that's going on in highways. The team deserves a great deal of credit, and indeed councillors deserve credit for diverting funding into the highways. We take decisions which have an impact on services that form the whole of the council, and that allows us the opportunity to invest further into highways. That said, I struggle to deal with the challenge of, in inverted commas, what people want. So I have had demands for the improvement of the road surfaces in Stafford, so we get the road surfaces in Stafford attended to, and that causes people to complain like mad. So you want your roads fixed, we fix them, and in the process of fixing them, people get very upset. I will, of course, now head to Tamworth, because you're a Tamworth councillor. Gungate has needed fixing for some time, and so it has been in part of the capital programme, and we have come under pressure from councillors, the borough council, the MPs, to get Gungate fixed. We notify people that we're fixing Gungate, and then guess what happens? The local MP launches a petition against us for fixing, wait for it, Gungate, which is what everybody wanted fixing. So sometimes you can't do right for doing wrong in this job, and it is a little dispiriting when responding to demands of the local population to improve their services, to improve their road surfaces, that we get these level of complaints. So I do hope, Councillor Clements, you keep flying the flag for Staffordshire County Council's highways in the way that you do, and in particular in Tamworth, where we are struggling with some unnecessary back and forth on this. I hope that people realise that we're doing it to make the world a better place, make Gungate better, so that their journey is smoother than it was before.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No? Can I just ask one? Page 19.
You're the boss, so yeah, I'm here. I am summoned here. I'm not here as a volunteer. Otherwise, I'd be somewhere else, Madam Chairman.
Here. Page 19, number 25. You've got Education, Health and Care Plan EHCP timelines. I think Councillor Yates touched on it a little bit. I just want to question the waiting on educational psychology advice and a recovery plan being developed. Do we have any timelines on that? Because it's a concern that we're tending to wait on the advice is holding up the EHCPs. Is there a timeline on that, or?
Madam Chairman, it continues to be a challenge, and it's a national challenge, not just a Staffordshire County Council challenge. As you know, we put in place funding for an additional 10 educational psychologists, and we were fortunate that we got, I think, about 7 fairly quickly. But there is still a backlog and a hold up in the system, and quite where we are with that is a matter for senior leadership team at this council on the 3rd of March, when they'll be discussing potential solutions or the scope of the challenge, with a view to coming up with some solutions to that challenge that we face. I've long said that the relentless rise in the number of children with education, health and care plans points to something more systemic that needs to be addressed. Whether that is the funding in schools, the ability of schools to fund children with some challenges in their schools, whether it is a way of schools improving their ratings through Ofsted by off-rolling or putting kids to one side who they can say, well, that's a kid with an EHCP, so we'll not count that, or whether they're off-rolling them or not. I think there's an issue here which the Secretary of State will have to tackle, and I know she is looking at these things, but it is something that speaks to a systemic problem that Staffordshire is part of, rather than something that we are uniquely responsible for. So it's not a great answer, I'm afraid. It is something that senior leadership team will be looking at on the 3rd of March, and we will continue to report to this committee, and in particular to Councillor Spencer's committee, as those potential answers come out.
Thank you. Are we quite happy to accept this report? Yes. Thank you, Councillor White. To item number 5, the MTFS Working Group Executive Response. Can I ask if we've all read those responses? And do we have any questions or concerns with those responses? Councillor Yates. Councillor White,
Yes, thank you, Chair. Referring to page 72, the response with regards to waste management. The working group were unable to receive the presentation actually on the waste management. It was cancelled for couple of reasons, so we never really were able to fully scrutinise that. However, we were aware of the concerns regarding Hanford, and I think the answer in some respects is, again, raising the dreaded subject, is pre-local government reorganisation, and I can see that there is a decision being made, and it's going to scrutiny on the 18th of March, and as along the lines of moving away from a partnership arrangement to effectively a waste supply arrangement, which infers that we become a customer of them as opposed to an integral partner. With LGO on the horizon, and knowing that site, well, when I say knowing that site, we didn't have a presentation, so we don't fully know, but getting the understanding that site is really due for a complete refurbishment, if not rebuild, and that isn't something which is going to be done in the immediate short term. It takes a while to do that. Is there a sort of consideration that response may well change in light of the fact that it becomes a strategic responsibility, waste management and recycling?
I benefit from having been chairman of the Joint Waste Management Board for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent for 4 years in the early 2000s. And also the Hanford project has been rumbling on for at least 10 years. And so I'm painfully aware of the situation at Hanford. There are important strategic reasons why we are better off being a customer than we are as a partner. And part of it is due to the risks that you've just identified in your question about the lifespan of the project, the lifespan of the facility, should I say, and the incentive to maintain the facility in a way that allows it to efficiently operate, and the questions that you would need to ask yourself along the lines of what if it has to close because the machinery breaks down? What do we then do? Who takes the responsibility for getting it repaired? And what risks do we expose Staffordshire taxpayers to if we are anything more than just a customer? So there are a whole load of avenues I could take you down, Councillor Yates, with the Hanford thing, which are probably out with this committee and probably better off done in confidential, because there's contractual arrangements that sit behind this. So I think I've said as much as I can in open forum. If you wanted further detail, it would have to be, I think, in confidential.
Thank you, Councillor White. Can I just add to that the officer that was due to give the report was poorly on the day, and unfortunately that's why we didn't have the report sent through to us. Do we have any further questions on the response, or are we all happy to accept the report? Yes? Okay, thank you. Okay, we now move on to item number 7, Climate Change Action Plan 2025 to 2030. I believe, Councillor White, you're presenting this one.
Yeah, but you can't wait. Right, but in order to add a bit of spice to the presentation, I've got two absolute experts in the field. To my left, Mr. Cartwright, and to my right, Mrs. Hudson, who are both experts in this area, and also the principal drafters, authors, architects of the report. So you couldn't have any better experts to help with the help do the presentation. The committee is asked to review the revised Climate Change Action Plan with its key climate mitigation adaptation requirements and make suggestions for any required amendments, and also note the climate change risk assessment included within the action plan and make suggestions for any requirements, any required amendments. The report itself sets out the history of the document, where we were before and how we've actually got here. And then sets out things like the UK UK Climate Change Risk Assessment and other associated reports which support what we're trying to achieve. With that, Madam Chairman, I'm going to hand over to Mr Cartwright, who will talk you through some of the details of the report. This will enable perhaps a coherent discussion based on some of the details, and then we can come back for questions afterwards. Mr Cartwright.
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. I'll be referring to this document on a few occasions, so hopefully people can just follow me. I'll try and reference page numbers. So the Climate Change Action Plan document details our approach to tackling climate change. It's concise, 37 pages in length. I believe shows an ambitious plan which helps us deliver progress at pace. The Climate Change Action Plan follows strategic direction from two documents, the first one being our Climate Change Strategic Development Framework, which was reviewed or refreshed through Cabinet in early 2024 to incorporate both mitigation and climate change adaptation. Mitigation being our pursuit towards net zero by 2050 and adaptation, how we adapt to a changing climate. Also got linkage into the Staffordshire Adaptation Strategy, which under the leadership of the Staffordshire Sustainability Board also signs up all of our districts and borough colleagues to look at how we as councils ensure that we adapt to climate change in the services that we provide. I'd just like to reiterate that our current Climate Change Action Plan is quite focused on mitigation, so that pursuit of net zero by 2050, and that this new Climate Change Action Plan is both mitigation and adaptation wrapped up in one. On the adaptation side, we will include a consideration of things like flood risk, extreme heat, drought, storms, and consider what those impacts may mean to the services that we deliver. We undertook a climate change risk assessment exercise across the whole organisation over a 12-month period. We engaged with all of the directorates in depth, and I personally feel that we certainly helped embed climate change more deeply throughout all of those directorates. We had really positive engagement, and I took great acknowledgement that our current plans and provisions already take us a long way into coping with weather extremes and how we need to adapt to that changing climate that climate change presents itself us with. We've tried to summarise for easy digestion both internally and externally within this document. I refer to page 7, which tries to tease out some key actions within the Climate Change Action Plan. I'll just focus on a few of those. Under the banner of mitigation is that pursuit towards net zero by 2050. The three I'd like to highlight focus around areas that are traditional within reducing our carbon footprint within buildings, transport and waste. So we will focus on the development of EV infrastructure, the building decarbonisation within our own corporate estate, and also within waste reduction. When we look towards 2050, our residual carbon emissions are really focused around our waste operation. Some of that will be focused around positive engagement, not just around behaviour change, but hopefully leading our communities through positive engagement, such as communications like the carbon bubble that was seen 2 years ago and the Sustainability Dream House. Under adaptation, we're looking at key actions within flood risk mitigation, climate resilient highways and public rights of way network, which are suffering a little bit with erosion with the high levels of rainfall that we're experiencing. And we also like to support businesses to become more sustainable in the future. On page 9, there is a summary document again on the key climate risks identified. I won't talk through every single one, but I'd like to just explain why there's 2 little happy smiley faces by 2 of those actions. And that's the reason being is that we feel that there are some positives from a changing climate, and we've teased out a couple there. The first one being green jobs, so as we adapt to a changing climate and we start to go towards a net zero future, there are opportunities within the green economy. And green jobs tend to be higher paid jobs, which will add to future prosperity within the county. Also, with the changing climate, we feel that there is an increased opportunity for outdoor recreation and the positive public health benefits that comes from that. Within the climate change risk assessment towards the end of the document, I'd like to just highlight that we have followed a national template which identifies national risks and what the national landscape looks like, but what we've also done is overlaid local impacts and local considerations to make sure that it has a focus on what we can expect in Staffordshire and how we will consider that. In summary, I'd like to round off by saying that the old or the current action plan, which was refreshed in Cabinet in 2024, had 45 actions. This new action plan has 81. And I think that really reflects how we're looking at a changing climate and how we're going to adapt to that. The document details our approach. And I think if you refer to page 13, firstly, it looks at our actions, which we will proposed or reviewed on a 12-monthly basis. And then from page 30, it details the risk assessment, which we propose we will review on a 5-yearly basis in line with national guidelines. And with that, I invite questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. A lot of work looks like it's gone into that, so that's appreciated. Do we have any questions? I know I was ignoring him. Councillor Yates.
Yes, thank you for that. Have you got a spare hour? I'm very pleased to see adaptation has now almost come to the same level as mitigation, because I think one of the things which we have seen over the course of the last couple of winters and certainly summer is serious swings in weather. I mean, 1 minute it's been absolutely frigid and freezing, locked in with ice. Next minute we've had torrential rain and we've had flooding associated with that, which has caused significant infrastructure damage. You know, there's no doubt about that, certainly in the lower part of the moorlands away from me in Teen, ironically, which is the division of the cabinet member for highways. One of his roads got washed away, which pretty much trapped him in. And I think the need to engage, I'm looking at page 173 on our plan, which is the action plan priorities, the need to work in partnership with farmers to look at the grants available for setting land aside, not just for the obvious thing like tree planting, rewilding, but actually incorporating that with slowing streams and tributaries down for our main rivers. So when we get those weather extremes, the water is held back, which is something which has been talked about for a while. And I would like to see a lot more engagement and a lot more pilots to actually see and get that done, because generally speaking, that work which needs to happen on those tributaries is work which can happen on land which is perhaps of lower agricultural value anyway. So it's not that particular issue where you can conflicting the need to grow food, livestock, whatever, with the loss of land available to do that. If you're talking, you know, cloughs and gullies and steep valley sides, then they tend to be the less productive land anyway. And it fits, all of this is joined up. It fits in with the adaptation, it fits in with carbon capture, and it fits in with enhancing biodiversity. So I would like to see that, and it could well fit in with actually expanding your trees and your woodland. So I would like to see that as a major priority, because that's physical work which has an immediate impact. EV vehicle infrastructure, the Levi funding has been there and has hovered around. It has slipped, and it'd be nice to see that actually started. I know that the officers are working hard, and I certainly don't blame them for the issues with getting it on the ground. But it has come to the stage where we're really at the tipping point where confidence has has been lost a little bit in the transition to EV vehicles, because I think the early adopters who've got driveways, who've got facilities to put EV charging in their homes is almost, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near a saturation point, but it is coming up to that point where you now need to step up and move on to that next phase. So I would like to see the Levi project actually starting to deliver and start to showcase that actually happening. And again, you've got support businesses in a sustainable future. There's too many developments, there's too many business units being built for whatever purposes, whether the logistics or whatever, with too few renewable projects incorporated in them. How many of these massive, great, big warehouses do you see which haven't got solar panels on them, which haven't got a small wind turbine in the corner? If the units haven't got south-facing roofs, why haven't the car parks got canopies on them? Why aren't we really pushing this and talking about this? I mean, that becomes a strategic issue as much as anything, and it's the responsibilities of the districts and boroughs to try and put those in with supplementary planning documents, which does cause an issue because they're competing with the next borough, which perhaps hasn't got those supplementary planning documents. So again, that's something which causes a conflict. Moving on, page 173, let me scroll down to that, just to see what I highlighted there. Oh, that is that, 181, sorry, my mistake. It was something which you picked up on, and that is I'm missing that. I'll move on to transport to schools while I work out why I put 191 on there. Oh, 191. Safe routes to schools and getting people to walk and getting away from private cars. We've got an issue where we actually hire bus companies to deliver school children slightly outside the range for walking area, and we have a string of Range Rovers following those buses because we don't allow them to sit in the empty seats. Which is something which has been raised for a long time, but that would start to mitigate private vehicles having to travel to schools, and also the problems those private vehicles cause by parking close to junctions and things. It's one of those things where, you know, climate change can be the driver to take off private vehicles and reduce that pollution, but there were so many knock-on benefits as a consequence of that, and I think that's something which really should be a quick win. I did speak to the chief executive when he started. I explained that to him, and I said, we've got an area which uses disability compliant buses, but the rule is either all or nothing. Why can't we just have that little bit of flexibility? So where we have got the disability access buses doing those school routes, why can't we actually, you know, charge for the empty seats? And it's little things like that, closing those little loops, which make a difference in the locality. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Yeah.
I agree with your point about adaptation. I think it is vital that we acknowledge the fact we are going to have to adapt to the climate change as we see it. I think your point, if we had farmers in the room, and we haven't, they'd be sort of apoplectic with rage, I think. But I'm not going to try and synthesize that on their behalf. But I will talk to the work that we should be doing in urban areas, as well as assuming that the farmers can absorb everything. How long ago do you recall seeing most front gardens being gardens? 20 years ago? Something like that? You go down most most urban roads now, and most of the front gardens are now drives, either block paved or tarmacked. The water comes down, it runs off straight into the highways, gullies, for us to deal with as a flood. In the back gardens, patios, astroturf replacing grass. Again, that leads to surface water runoff. So, in effect, you've gone from areas which have got a relatively small percentage with development on to areas which are pretty much pure tarmac. And so it is incumbent upon residents, when they are inevitably having to change their front garden to a drive, to think about putting in place those sort of drives which can absorb water, and there are those available. I've got them at work. You talked about the electric vehicle infrastructure funding. On its face, it appears simple, electric vehicle infrastructure funding, but it's not. And I'll make it very clear that Staffordshire County Council is not responsible for putting in place electric vehicle infrastructure. The system that we've got enables the private sector to do that through the Levi funding that you've described. However, I'm just at work at the moment going through the renewal of my electricity contract. And the capacity in the grid to, if I wanted to put another 20 EV chargers in at work, I've currently got a capacity of 700 kilovolts per day. If I were to put 20, 25, 22 kilovolt electric chargers, and forgive me, I was just doing this on Friday, so I'm right up on the details, I would need to ask for additional capacity from the grid. Capacity that doesn't exist. In fact, there is a strong incentive for people who buy in bulk, as I do, electricity, to hand back any spare capacity so it can be used elsewhere. And if you hand it back, you ain't getting it back in the future because we just don't have the electricity generating capacity. You could say, well, okay, I could put solar panels on the roofs, but that supply is lumpy, to say the least. And actually, it doesn't solve the continuous flow problem that businesses need. So it isn't. It's a seductively easy thing to say that if we put in place the charging posts, all will be solved as far as electric vehicle uptake is concerned. But it's not. I know you're not being as simplistic as that, but the headline can appear rather simple, and it's anything but that. And you're right, I do think that the confidence has been lost is being lost by consumers. Those early adopters are still driving around in their Teslas. They might buy a new Tesla, but actually with new players in the market, maybe a different one. The development costs for EV infrastructure, which you've touched on, again, you've got to be very careful about assuming that there is free money available to put in electric vehicle infrastructure. If you create a supplementary planning document, which I'll refer to as an SPD by shorthand, you could, of course, create a set of rules which means that anybody doing a development will be required to put in place solar panels, as you've described, canopies, as you've described. But I've done development in my professional life, my working life, and it isn't. There is a temptation to think that it is the developer that pays. It isn't. It's the landowner that ultimately ends up paying, with a reduction in the amount of money that's available to them for the land that they actually own. So once you've taken off Section 106 contributions for the new play park in the local area and for the cycling routes, Section 278 contributions to the Highways Authority in order to improve the roads that support the development locally, once you've taken off the requirement to put in place new infrastructure for Severn Trent or whoever your providers are, once you've bid to Central Networks for your new electricity and your substation, once you've done your environmental impact assessment, developments are becoming non-viable. So the proposal here is to layer on an additional cost. You want jobs and growth, get that, tick, but with the amount of layers of cost that we currently have, something will have to give. And if you're saying, well, the priority is now EV infrastructure, then what goes out of Section 106, Section 278, and the other environmental and requirements that are incumbent upon developers? The safer routes to school thing, I understand what you're saying about disability compliant buses and some of those becoming available. But in a county like Staffordshire, where you've got a range of buses in operation, it wasn't us that imposed the rules on buses to be disabled compliant. It was central government. They held off and held off and held off for 20 years, and then all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, they went, you know what? No, from now on, unless it's disabled compliant, you can't offer vacant seats. And so, whilst you might have some buses in your area that are disabled compliant, some days those buses get serviced. And that means a non-disabled compliant bus will be going down the street that day. And if somebody can't get on it, then we've got all sorts of comeback from that. So I suppose we could say, well, on the days the disabled bus turns up, then you can have a seat. But that doesn't help people who have access requirements, who are going to need that bus available every single time they go to school. I don't know where you live, Councillor Yates, but the fact that the cars that follow, or the vehicles that follow your buses are all Range Rovers, would suggest that it's fairly affluent, and so the vacant seat scheme may not be necessary. Perhaps the local residents in your division could use their helicopters, because that's a far more direct. You can land it in the playground. I'm being facetious, but you know I'm just having a laugh with you. Right, I hope that's answered all your points.
Councillor Yates does want to come back, but I have asked him to keep it small.
Yeah, you're absolutely quite right. I did say give me an hour, but the reality of it is there aren't easy solutions. There's thoughtful solutions, and it takes some planning. So I certainly wasn't being glib and pointy. I wear a similar hat in the district. What I will say, you're absolutely right about sustainable drainage and estates and roads and things. And I think planning authorities are not as strict as they certainly could be on ensuring that sustainable drainage criteria are applied and maintained. And I think that is an issue which we're sort of recognising in our district, and you know, I'm sure the district's recognising as well. It wasn't so long ago that had an estate in a Hull flooded really badly, so, you know, years past. And it was identified that the drainage, it was a new estate, the drainage was overwhelmed with the amount of surface water runoff coming down off the driveway. So yes, it is a very a pertinent point on that. And electrical connectivity, I can only speak for myself as experimenting with my house. Solar panels balanced with the batteries. I'm around about 60% off-grid, but, you know, which does enough for me, EVs and things. But, yeah, it is getting that balance right, and that is something which was identified in the working group, and that'll be discussed on the next item of the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I have Councillor Hayden and then Councillor Spencer.
I think mine's just, well, I don't know what telematics are. If you could explain what that is for me. It's on page 13. Thank you.
Yeah, telematics is a software program to understand where the vehicle has been and to understand, you know, what it could look like in the future. So when you link that into EV, it could be where do those charging stations need to be, how frequently do we need to stop, or how long do we need to charge for. So it's really about understanding what those fleet movements look like.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you for that. I think, as has already been said, we're in this period of time, aren't we, when most of the easy and quick wins have probably gone, and we're now looking to keep that momentum going around some of these things. On the action plan itself, and I don't know if I will echo what other people as local councillors have experienced, but flood risk management, I think we all have issues now around flood risks. The disappointment for me really is that when you look for help and assistance, when local communities look for help and assistance, unless people's houses or businesses are being inundated, then there is very little support. As something that's akin to speeding, I suppose, that most of us suffer from areas on our divisions where they're speeding, because fortunately there's no serious injury or death as a result, then you don't qualify for any help and support. So the point I'm trying to make is that I do think that there needs to be more frontline, if you like, direct help and assistance around some of that. And when we look at things in this plan, like tree and woodland planting, I find it really difficult, residents find it really difficult to find somewhere you can plant a tree locally, because someone always owns the land and doesn't necessarily want a load of trees on there. We went through, didn't we, that sort of resilience period where we were trying to make communities more resilient, whatever that meant. I was never 100% sure. But there was a document about 5 years ago that I thought tackled some of these issues really well. And it talked about building something it described as social capital. Rather than building resilience, it was saying that the way forward is to build social capital, i.e. local people, helping local people to help themselves, And when I look at all of these priorities here around supporting local communities, waste reduction, decarbonisation, tree planting, it does seem to lend itself to that more building social capital than it does just supporting and flood risk management, which at the end of the day there probably isn't a great deal of help and support there. So I suppose the issue for me is I'm just a little disappointed that we end up with the usual supporting communities comments rather than actually doing something a little bit more proactive. And I think that local councils naturally play a part in that, about building that local social capital. Those people that are directly affected by the issues locally, because there is the support there is the enthusiasm there. And I just think the report could have gone a little bit further rather than just supporting, actually to building something that has a future and that has some sustainability around it.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. I think, yeah, very valid comments. And just it links into Councillor Yates saying about flooding and how we think about flooding in the communities that we impact. I think the approach, it won't be on your page 6, but it's on my page 6. But our approach is about working together. So I think, yeah, working together, whether that's working with the farmers to think about how they could change their land use management to reduce the impact of flooding, or how we as residents could maybe think about the impact of flooding and how we can engage with that. The Sustainability Dream House gave little inklings of how communities could get involved in that picture that you painted about them being involved. Certainly comments from our leader about tarmacked over, front lawns and things like that. We all need to think about this deeply, and I would hope that within our promotions we can get everybody on board, but it is about education. It is about working together.
I just want to agree with your points about the supporting communities. It's in danger of becoming a hackneyed phrase, isn't it? Where everything that we do requires supporting communities, and it needs to be defined. And whilst we did see communities step up during the COVID pandemic, where people were looking out for each other, they were making sure people got food and were well, that hasn't dragged through into our day-to-day life now. And the idea that supportive communities can actually deliver this requires certainly a lot more at parish council level, I think, across the county of Staffordshire and those non-parished areas and communities. So it is a challenge. I think the other aspect of people thinking about what they do to support climate change and in particular mitigation, and learning to live with the fact that frequent heavy rain is something that we are going to have to get used to, is people's attitude to simple things like trees. So you say, for example, your observation is it's quite hard to find somewhere to plant a tree. In communities that I live in and represent, the tendency is to chop a tree down because it presents you with a first world problem. I get to my car and there's sticky stuff all over the car and I don't like it in the spring, so I'm going to chop that tree down. Oh, okay. You do realise that, of course, that's absorbing a load of water in your drive. Well, I don't care. I don't like my car getting sticky. I came home last year. I've got a tree that looks like a trophy, big pine tree. It's probably about 10 metres, 8 metres high, in the shape of a sort of trophy. Came back to discover that the next door neighbour had cut the back clean off along the boundary line because it was dropping pine needles onto their car and they didn't like it. And would I do something about it? I said, well, it's absorbing a lot of water and it's doing a good thing for our little area, but first world problems, So I think that if people are dealing with those first world problems, then they need to start thinking about the impact that they are creating on themselves and their neighbours as a result of that. That's not an answer to a question, that's just agreeing with you and issuing a lament, I think.
Thank you, Councillor White. I've got Councillor Cox, Councillor Rudd and then Councillor Clements to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the problem that we've got, the document in itself is great. I do think personally that it is about dealing with the results of climate change and what we do to mitigate and etc. around that. The problem is here, if that's what we're said to believe, obviously the amounts of rainfall and flooding and everything. And to constantly achieve or target yourself to net zero, I think is battering the problem, because you're continually looking at ways of getting to net zero, but the problem is that we are getting the effects of climate change as we speak today. And I think it's upon us as to ensure what is happening is that we are dealing with, rather than thinking what's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years. Because it's deflecting the problem that we face today. Yes, you're dealing with a problem that we want to resolve tomorrow and for future generations and the world. I get that, and I'm not totally sceptic in terms of climate change. But I do have farmers within my division, a lot of them. And I want to quote something that I actually saw only this morning. And it's just possibly in response, and I know the leader made reference to it. Quote, "We've had enough. For the last 20 years, we've been attacked by the political classes telling us how to farm in the countryside. We're now being told to stop growing food and grow wildflowers. It's insanity." And that is a quote from a farmer that has farmed his family, a generational farmer, for 500 years. Now, if that family don't know how to manage the land, then it's not for us to come in and tell us how you're going to do it. Oh, by the way, your land isn't quite of a good grade. Don't worry about that. You're farming in the wrong area. No, you're not farming in the wrong area. You're farming where the land is, and you will work to those land situation. And possibly the mistake has been over the years where we haven't invested in the land to allow the farmers to actually do what they are good at. And they're the custodians. They'll manage it. But no, we've been wrong for many years since the climate change agenda. Now, I really am not a climate change skeptic. I believe that it's happening. I also believe something has to be done. But it's today that we have to have arguments for that tell us how we're going to deal with those situations of today's effects on climate change. And Councillor White is absolutely right when he refers to drives being turned into tarmac slabs and so forth. The legislation actually should say, no, you can't do that. But then you see the problem is you're forced to build so many houses. You compact them into areas where the drives aren't going to be big enough for the amount of people that live in the houses. So of course they turn the front into the car park because your streets are not suitable to put the cars on. Or if they are, first world problem, as Councillor White says, we have all these problems. There's a magnitude of issues around the whole thing, and it's not as simple as just trying to get to net zero by 2030.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Rudd.
Thank you, Chair. And this is quite a comprehensive report. But when it comes to climate change, is that like EV charging, for example, I was just thinking about it. Out of 20 of my friends, I'm the only one with an EV charger because mine's a new estate. I think in particular and this is quite a rural county when we consider it. Places like Cannock Chase are mentioned in this report. We've also got Gentile Common and myself, which in Councillor Cox's divisions, where we could experience quite difficulty. And I also find that bus travel, I think that for us to really get to, obviously, climate change proposals, the more urban areas, we're going to have to get our public transport better. Because, say, Boney Hayes is in my division, and on the very edge of it, there are constituents of mine who are quite vulnerable who have to use taxis. So getting them onto the under 13% capacity is going to be difficult. I think I welcome things like where we're leading on climate change. Particularly I work with the districts. I see. I think in Litchfield District we do quite well working with housing companies, but I see elsewhere around the county. But I think that, and also the role of parish councils. I think increasingly they're going to have to take a role, particularly in our rural areas. And this is what I hope that when we, as we take past climate change, because it is affecting us, there are more floods, it's wetter. I was born in New Zealand, for goodness sake, a country which is dramatically affected by this. I'm more critically aware of climate change, but I have concerns, particularly as we go through this, we think about our rural communities and how we, and also the vulnerable, the people that we as a council have a duty, because they're going to be impacted if we rush this through. But I think that quite a lot of these timetables I'm looking at are quite reasonably timed, and I think, unlike other, say, top-tier authorities, we're not rushing through our climate change agenda. And I think it's going to be a bumpy road, but I think we're making quick wins. I think it's to be actually commended, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Rudd. Councillor Clements.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to, again, draw people's attention to the fact that the Flood Risk Management came to Economy, Infrastructure and Communities Committee only on the 7th of January this year. And we've agreed to have an annual update and to support the progress of the accompanying work that continues as part of the FAIR programme. Now, the FAIR programme is flood aware, informed and resilient. So when Councillor White says those without parishes need to rely on their communities, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to, like COVID, bring people together to fight the common cause. We all know where the flooding happens. In Tamworth, we know that the River Tame and the River Anchor are going to flood in heavy rain. We know that underneath the arches down the Amington or the Glasgow Road are going to flood because the road is lower than the river, so the water's got nowhere to go. And it's how we deal with that. And I think being better informed as a community is the way forward. We all know where the hot spots or wet spots are, if you know. That's not quite right, but there we go. We all know where the flooding is going to happen. And I'm going to turn my microphone off now because I think I've just embarrassed our council leader.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. Councillor White, over to you.
Why would you do that to me, Madam Chairman? That's just not fair. Yeah. I'll give you an anecdote. That'll get me out of jail. My village flooded in 2007, and I was absolutely determined that my property wasn't going to be flooded. So I got some slats for the front door, mastic, no water's getting in this place, sandbags around the back because I hadn't that long left the army. So, defending my property from the ingress of the water, only to watch it coming up the toilet cistern to defeat me. The complexity of floodwater is something that doesn't just lend itself to simple solutions. It gets, as you say, with the example you gave in Tamworth of the dip that's lower than the river. I'm going to leave it there. I'm struggling to answer Councillor Clements' questions, really.
Thank you. I think on that note, I don't think we have any further questions, do we? No. Can I just say thank you to the officers? It is a very, very good report, and it's a very, very good, interesting read, and we thank you for all your hard work that's gone into it. It is appreciated, and I'm sure it will be appreciated for the years to come. So thank you. I also say, Councillor White, you are now free to leave the room if you wish. Mr. Cartwright, are you staying? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor White. Okay, we'll move on to number 8 of the agenda, which I've got a little speech just to read out to you all, and then I'll take some questions if that's okay. James is here, Mr. Cartwright and Helga is here to take questions if there are any. Okay. We're happy to present this report of the Climate Change Working Group relating to the new renewable energy. At our meeting in October, we agreed to look at the progress against Climate Change Action Target CR03 to review the Staffordshire County Council policy position to encourage renewable technologies in appropriate locations. Our meetings with officers and National Grid were very helpful to understand the current position and what more we can do to encourage and plan for renewable technologies to support the transition towards net zero emissions by 2050. We have made recommendations to the Cabinet Member and the Substantiality Board to further consider the opportunities, approach and potential renewable energy in Staffordshire. Can we move the report and ask for an executive response to the recommendations at a future meeting? Do we have any questions? Why break a habit of a lifetime? Councillor Yates.
Yes, I refer you to the challenges for Staffordshire, part of it, which is page 217, and stressing how critically important the local area energy planning system is. There was a debate about this on whether it was a county responsibility or whether it's a district or borough responsibility. I think the landscape is changing with local government reorganisation in the context that climate change fits fairly and squarely as a strategic authorities remit, and I think that actually focuses the mind for Staffordshire County Council as is, and potentially how it could result in the importance of driving forward the need for a local area energy plan, and the fact that we should be the lead authority to do it. So I think the comments in the report are quite strong supporting that, and I certainly think the direction of travel with regards to the local government reorganisation statement, which was released in the white paper on the 14th of December, certainly would augment the comments in that report. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Perry.
Sorry, it's not a question. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, declare a non-pecuniary interest in this, because it obviously affects planning authorities and boroughs and districts, talking about the battery storages, etc., which can be quite controversial. So I'd rather not take part in any debate on this particular subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
I think it's a very good report, and obviously it goes a long way to sorting things out in many ways, contrary to what I might have said in the earlier agenda. What I find is that we can obviously have the ambitions and try and work things out, and I get that, and we can set out recommendations. But when you've got, in a sense, with the National Grid as really the one that actually can deal with the problem that is behind the curve, then I wonder how we straighten that curve up, because that, in a sense, is the National Grid is the one that's going to play, is the ace card in this whole agenda. And you can't have, if it cannot meet demand, then we're going to have a problem. So, but I understand what's been said.
Thank you. Councillor Cartwright. Councillor, I've just promoted you, thank you. Not promoted you, but I've just elected you. Elected you, sorry. Would you like to come in and say anything on that?
Yeah, the National Grid, well, all the district network operators operate at the moment and look into the future in a sort of 10-year time frame. What they call distribution future energy scenarios. So they do think about EVs, they do think about houses and if they're more electrically heated rather than gas heated at this current point in time. The problem is they do look in that 10-year time frame, and when you're thinking about renewable energy or even electric vehicles or heating your home with a heat pump, that is really a 20 or 30-year time period. And I suppose that's when the question of local area energy planning comes in. And, you know, would members like to explore what that looks like, the benefits that it will bring? There is a substantial cost, but it certainly you then take the challenge, I suppose, to the DNO and say, this is what we think our county will look like in that 20 or 30-year time horizon, and ask them to respond to it. But it's very much working with them. It's not working against them, it's working together. I think that was included within the report around local area energy planning and formed into one of those recommendations to go to the Sustainability Board. And it feels like that debate is a debate that, yeah, probably needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No? Are we all quite happy to have that moved? Yep. Okay, thank you. I just think we have the work plan to go through now, don't we, Mandy?
Thank you, Chair. The next scheduled meeting is on the 8th of April. At the moment, there's only one item of business. So it's up to the committee and the chair closer to that date if it goes ahead.
Thank you. As that may not go ahead, dependent on what we decide for the day, can I just say thank you to you all for all your work and all your teamwork, and I do appreciate each and every one of you all turning up every time we have a meeting, because we do have a fair few of them. And I think your input is brilliant. So if I can just take a moment to say thank you to yourselves and to the officers, to Simon that sits behind the screen and does the work, and to Mandy and Debs. It is all appreciated, so thank you. I think that's the end of the meeting, so home time. Thank you very much.